Hello and welcome back to Georgian art. First of all, I do owe you an apology for having skipped the session about pre-Christian art and the artifacts as such, because we seem to have carried away while talking about archaeology more than actually talking about art. But it was so interesting we just couldn't help it, and I hope you agree. Now today we are going to, but I promise you that we shall come back to it, and hopefully we are going to have an expert talking about it, but I'm in the process of negotiating at the moment, so we shall come back to pre-Christian Georgian art. Today we are going to talk about medieval Georgian architecture, which occupies probably the largest part in the history of Georgian art, and it's probably the best studied part of its culture. Now, when you arrive to Georgia, the first thing you should expect your guests to do to you, well, after overfeeding you probably, that they will take you to see the beautiful churches of Georgia. There are lots of ancient buildings on the territory of Georgia. They say there are more than 5,000 old buildings, and that does not include the ones which are on the territory of Turkey. And some of them are under the protection of UNESCO World Heritage Convention. Now, we can't say for sure how it all began. Most probably, and it's most likely, that building Georgian churches began in the 4th century. There are some allegations and speculations that some of the ruins are earlier and they are attributed to the times when apostles preached in Georgia, which is 1st century. But there is very little evidence to support this argument. So what has stayed and what is there, the material culture, which actually we can see, it all proves that it must have begun in the 4th century, which is about the time when Saint Nino preached Christianity in Georgia. According to the legend, Saint Nino ordered to build a wooden church on top of the grave of Sidonia. I probably haven't told you the story, but I hope you can look it up if you want to, but I shall tell you that the main reason why Saint Nino arrived to Georgia was that she wanted to see and venerate the place where the robe of the Lord was buried. And we believe that it is buried together with Sidonia, because Sidonia was a sister of a Jewish soldier who went to Jerusalem at the time when Jesus was crucified and got his robe, which was cast a lot over. So that church obviously did not survive, that first building. However, also according to the chronicles, we also know that King Miriam, after being converted, invited architects from Constantinople. We don't know exactly what those architects have built, or if they even built anything by themselves, or whether they simply taught Georgian stonemasons how to build a new place of worship, which was a Christian place of worship. And then the Georgian masters did it themselves. The first existed, or not first, but the earliest, which we can trace and which we can see, the earliest example is the Basilica of Nekresi Monastery. Well, Nekresi Monastery was built much later, but I'm going to show you the earliest building there, which is a very small, teeny tiny church. You can see here, the lower, yes, here. This is supposed to be a basilica, But when you look at it, it's not quite like the basilica we know or you have seen in Rome or on other places. It's very small, it's teeny tiny, and the eastern-west axis is not elongated at all. It's the other way around, probably. It's wider than longer. And it has open gallery-like construction on one side. Most likely, we can assume that it was probably only a priest who used to go in there and serve liturgies, and people were gathered outside and listened to the liturgy, the voice of the priest coming from the church. Now, this strangeness of this construction tells us that it was all new religion, brought some new feelings, new emotions, and new tasks for architects too. The fear of the new God told people that maybe they were not even worthy of going inside the church. It was just the priest who was allowed to go in there because it was holy and it was somehow unknown. So this earliest building is showing us that a builder or architect doesn't quite know what he is doing. Yes, he does know what basilica is, and he does know that there is a different type of the church or the building which they are supposed to make from now on. But it's kind of early attempt to get to it. So it's kind of almost the process of learning. But nevertheless, it's very beautiful and it's very kind of charming. Now, next building I'm going to show you, it's more like looking like a real basilica. Not like looking, but it is a real basilica. It's called Bolni Sissioni Cathedral. It's dated to the 5th century because we have actually an earliest inscription in there which tells us who made it. So the king that's mentioned there was a king in the 5th century. Now, when you look at it, the first thing that kind of grabs your eye, probably, is the color of the stone. It's greenish turquoise, which gives it some kind of joyful or some kind of interesting, let's say, appearance. However, this church is not vastly decorated. It's kind of simple, and there is some kind of primordial simplicity about it, which gives it a monumental sense of monumentalism. It's almost heavy, it's down to earth. It's standing very securely and stably. On one side, I'm trying to show you, but I don't know how can I manage. Here, on this side, there is an arcade or gallery of columns which have a horse-shaped arcs on top. If you look at the plan of this church, which I'm sorry I can't provide here, this church is a 3-nave church. The aisles inside are separated by 5 pair of columns, and the columns are shaped in a cross shape. But the interesting thing about this church is that it has all these 3 naves have the same roof from outside. Inside they have different vaults. The middle one is semicircle vault, and the side ones have quarter round shape. But when you look at it from outside, it looks like it's one nave church almost, except at the extensions on sides, which, as I told you, on one side there is a gallery, and on the other side there is a smaller gallery, because on the eastern corner it has a baptistry, which is quite unusual for this time. There's a separate kind of space for it. Now, this Bolnisi church, as I told you, is not decorated. It does have some kind of relief figures, sculptures on top of capitals of columns, but it's not decorated on facades from outside, so it's kind of following probably Byzantine idea that it's not interesting. I mean, outside space for Byzantine architecture is almost not interesting for architects to decorate, so they are busy with the interior. However, if you look carefully, I want to emphasize this. This is maybe not terribly obvious here in this church, but there is some kind of implication which is going to be even more obvious in later times, in the architecture of later times. I want to tell you about this, how Georgian architect understands the facade or outward space, not space, but outward surface of the church building. It's almost never just merely plain or flat, because for Georgian architect it's kind of uninteresting. So sometimes there are some protrusions, something is pulled out from the flat kind of surface, or sometimes it's even carved inside. So it adds some extensions, which at some extent does follow the construction inside, but at the same time, if you look carefully, it's almost like sculpting the church. It's almost like sculptural kind of appearance, which gives it a sense of play of dark and light. This is something which Western art calls chiaroscuro, and I cannot think of any closer term to give you of what I am trying to say, because we do have in Georgian a word for it, but there is no English equivalent for it. So I think chiaroscuro is probably the best word, but let me explain that this is not the most obvious example of that. It's very early kind of implication, and I'm going to remind you later about it. The same thing. Okay, the next church that we are going to talk about is the Monastery of the Holy Cross, which is dated to the end of 6th and beginning of the 7th centuries. Wait. Is that right? Is it the Monastery of the Holy Cross, right? I can't see from here. Yes, that's right. Now, in the first picture, you can see the exterior of the building, but before you get to this church, I have to tell you that it's situated absolutely beautifully. It's standing on top of a hill, and the location is so marvelous that it has become the inspiration of even the literary works and poetry and lots of kind of other arts other than just copying it in architecture. And the road which takes you to this church has many turns before it gets there, and it shows you this church from different angles. So this location is the first thing which takes your eye. Now, the reason why it's standing on this hill is that in the 4th century, again, according to the legend, Saint Nino erected a cross on that place, because that was the place where ancient temple was standing before. So when Saint Nino destroyed those temples, well, she didn't, her prayers did, and the temples were destroyed. On one of the places, she erected a cross. So later, when it was decided to build a church on that place, it was very difficult to build it next to the cross, and they didn't want to demolish that cross either. So for the first small church was built in the end of the 6th century, next to this cross, and that church is still preserved. But later, Prince Stephanos I decided to build this church, and he built this church on top of that cross, so that the cross, if you look at the other picture, other photo on the other side, the cross is still standing there, and it's erected on a pedestal. So when you walk into the church, the first thing you see is this big, enormous, very, very tall cross. But also, when you walk into the church, what you feel is that the dome is absolutely dominating there. So this is one of the first examples, not the first, I mean, there were the others earlier, but this is most iconic, probably, first domed cross church. This is tetrachong, which means that it has 4 apses. The entrance is from the south, and the outer construction follows the interior construction, so that you can even guess what may be in there when you look at this picture. But it's not a passive repetition of what's happening inside. So this is probably the first time when facade gains independence value. Facade becomes just as expressive as the interior of the church. It is also decorated with relief sculptures, which can be considered as archaic comparing to later ones, but they are quite high relief and very finely worked on. Unfortunately, I don't have them here, the close-ups. But you can look it up on the internet if you're interested. Basically, actually, I wanted to tell you that these podcasts are not meant to be kind of educational in a sense that I'm giving you a high education in the history of Georgian art. No, not at all. They are more like teasers. I'm trying to inspire and make you want to know more about it. It's more like a spoiler, like giving you some kind of reason to want to know more, to learn more. So that's why today when I was going to talk about these things, I was thinking about dividing this into periods, like stages, like early stage and transitional stage and developed stage. But then I realized that the material is so vast that there is no point anyway. So let's just go through the most iconic examples. Okay? I hope it's okay. Well, this church, actually, this Jvari, or Monastery of the Holy Cross, it is kind of crowning the artistic search, what was taking place in the past. And at the same time, it's founding the new era or new style in Georgian architecture. Similar examples were kind of spread soon all over Georgia, all over the country. There are kind of almost analogies, almost kind of copies of it, not exactly copies, because I don't know if you have noticed, or maybe I should have said it, that Georgian architects or Georgian masters don't ever repeat anything. They don't never make two exactly the same thing. Well, it's characteristic of any creativity, I guess. It's impossible to actually copy something exactly identical. But if you look closely at Georgian ornaments even, and Georgian relief sculpture, let alone the churches, even two leaves or two same kind of ornaments are always different. They always differ. There is always some kind of difference between them. I think that's kind of interesting point, because Georgians can't stick to rules, and they have problems with kind of too strict orders. Yes. Okay, let's move on to the next one, what we were going to... Yes, actually, this monastery of the Holy Cross gives rise to the new new type of Georgian architecture, and it kind of becomes prevalent later, the domed cross churches, even though in next stage of the development of Georgian architecture, they still built basilicas as well as cross-domed churches, but later on it becomes more celebrated and more kind of widespread. So this early stage of Georgian medieval architecture belongs to the time period of from the 4th to the end of the 7th century, let's say. And after that, in the 8th century, we have transitional period, which is full of very, very strange things happening. Well, this time actually, after the rise of Islam, which affected Georgia greatly, architecture and building very much moved from big cities to provinces. But nevertheless, it has not ceased its existence. Georgians carried on and continued building new buildings, and not just building, but also looking for new forms and new shapes. Sometimes the choice of different stones and not just finely honed stones was caused by the fact that they couldn't afford it, or they couldn't find it because the times were difficult and they just had to use whatever was available locally. But apart from that, apart from the use of material, there are also very, very strange things happening. Sometimes you can see the churches which the order of the way the stones are laid does not follow any order at all. It's all chaotic. It's all kind of in chaos. But nevertheless, you feel like there is so much dynamism going on that it's almost celebrating the sense of life, the feeling of liveliness. The other times you may see some kind of destruction of previous rules, like instead of using squinches, which was the case in earlier architecture, the domes were supported by squinches. Now you can see pendentives, and not just pendentives, but sometimes they both are used, pendentives and squinches at the same time, which is very, very unusual and very strange. And sometimes you can see something as strange as a basilica having two domes. Can you see that? Is it? Is it right? Okay, I have to remove this unnecessary pieces of paper. Now, this church is located in Kakheti, which is in the eastern Georgia. It is called Gurjanis Velatminda, which means the most holy, probably dedicated to the Mother of God, of Gurjani. Here you can see something really, really strange. Two domes are standing on top of a basilica, so it's very, very unusual. Well, we do have a church which has appearance of it's also in Kakheti. It has an appearance of a basilica and it has one dome, and it's kind of considered as a Kuppelhalle type, which in German it means domed hall. So what is meant there is that a dome is not resting on independently standing columns, but it's supported by either walls or protrusions or walls. Well, this is actually applicable to the type of the Holy Cross too, because in the Holy Cross there are no independent columns supporting the dome. It's also resting on the corners of those apses, and it's very obvious that it's like a hole dominated by the dome there too. So it's kind of a similar understanding of this Kuppelhalle thing here, but it looks very, very much different. Now, I wanted to tell you that this idea of Kuppelhalle is often related by Georgian scholars to the idea of earlier dwelling place of pre-Christian times, in which there was one single space for living, and the light was coming from the top inside. So they are relating this idea, which later developed into the later peasant house called darbazi, the hole. So it may be related. It's kind of likely. But here, let's go back to this Gurjani church. Here, it is three churches basilica. Three churches basilica is different from three nave basilica or three aisle basilica, as usually is kind of known, because they used to have three different sanctuaries. And it was probably caused by the fact that they wanted to serve several liturgies per day, and you cannot serve more than one liturgy a day in the same sanctuary. So that was probably the cause. So this church uses not honed stones, as you see, but it uses cobblestone, which is characteristic for Kakhetian architecture. They like it. They like using this kind of uneven shape, kind of different shapes of stones. And also here too, the domes are resting on squinches as well as on pendatives. So I'm sorry I can't look at what I'm showing you. That's why I have to look into my plan of what I'm going to move on to. So I do apologize for that. A bit disorganized. Now, next one. Yes, this actually is the expression of transitional period, which as I told you, is very unusual. And if you remember, at the first session, I showed you Nuga Saqdari, which is in the territory of Turkey, and it's that church is not almost, but it's built in a very strange place where you feel, when you look at it, you feel like you may not even be able to get to there, because it's in such a place on a rock, built actually on the rock, on the side of the rock. I don't even know how did they build it. It's marvelous, but I have climbed on it, and let me tell you, it was very difficult to climb there, even though I was much younger back then. And that's one of the reasons why they chose to build those churches in such places is that invaders were attacking all the time and from all sides. So they had to protect their churches and build them in places where the enemy could not get or would find it difficult to get. Yes, the next stage of development of medieval Georgian architecture is from the 11th or 10th to 13th to the end of 13th century, and it is the time of great Georgian revival. And it is, I mean, Georgia is strong, powerful, united, and free of the enemies. So that time is even called Georgian Renaissance sometimes. That is the time when even Shota Rustaveli wrote his famous epic poem, Vepristrausani, the Knight in the Panther Skin. And many amazing and really, really great things were happening those times in other areas of arts like goldsmith, iconography, wall painting, which we are going to discuss soon, and manuscripts. Basically, it's a great era, which is obviously manifested in architecture. This is probably the most iconic church of Georgia. This is called Svetitskhoveli, the life-giving pillar. It was built in the 11th century, and it was a see of Catholicos. It has undergone many invasions and many damages, but it has been restored many times, but it still kind of carries that authentic look. Well, Svetitskhoveli is an enormous, absolutely enormous, large cathedral. And if you can see here on the top of the hill, which way is that? Yes, that way. Here, you can see the monastery of the Holy Cross looking down on Svetitskhoveli from, and you can see how marvelous is that's located. So Svetitskhoveli has the shape of a cross, but it has a west-east axis elongated, so that it wouldn't be called cross in square, but it would be called cross in rectangle on the plan, if you look at the plan of it. It has only one apse, and the walls used to be painted, and there are still some leftovers or remains of those paintings, but because of those invasions, it has been, though they have been lost, most of it. Now, if you look at the construction, you can see it almost looks like a staircase. These steps are rising from one another. And it's finished with this tent-shaped dome. Some of the arches here have merely decorative function. And as you can see, the middle ones are usually elevated. They are usually raised to give it some kind of sense of liveliness and dynamism. But some of them actually do have construction, kind of constructive function, let's say. They serve the purpose of taking away weight from and heaviness of the building, of the top kind of part. Like, for example, if you look at this arcade, is this gallery here, it's not just decorative. It also has architectural purpose. It takes away, it kind of makes it lighter, the construction. So it's not as heavy as it was supposed to be, or it would have been if there was no kind of opening. The other amazing thing about it is that it uses polychromy, different colors of stones. Basically, main part is sand color. Can you see that? Is it? But some bits of it, like I'm going to show you here, for example, on the Eastern Alps, to emphasize this place which belongs to the sanctuary from the outside, they use red stone. It's not tinted, it's not colored, it's the color of the stone, it's a natural color. And the later restored bits are made with greenish stone. So you can see where these additions, extensions are, later ones, because they are kind of greener. This church was built by someone named Arsukidze, who probably, it's likely that he didn't live to the end of this when this was finished. But somebody who finished this building later put up his arm, the relief sculpture of his arm, on the upper side. Where is it? Sorry. It must be here. Somewhere. Yes, here. You probably can't see there, but it's there. Let me tell you. And in order to glorify the hand, the arm of the master, of the great master who made this building come true. And this church is the most obvious and the most, the finest example of this period, this time, when Georgia was strong and powerful, and the Renaissance took place in architecture as much as it took place in other types of art. Yes, I also want to show you Gelati Monastery, which also belongs to this stage of development, and it was built in the 12th century. It's also another fine example of Georgian architecture, and not just architecture, but it has absolutely amazing mosaics and paintings inside. And the reason why I just wanted to show it to you is that this church is in very big trouble today. As we speak, it's getting more and more and more damaged. It's mainly, it's been affected by rain, they say, and the rain washed down most of the frescoes, the wall painting. But I also believe that there was not enough care given to it by state authorities and whoever is in charge of cultural affairs in Georgia. And the saddest part of it is that those experts and those art historians who are willing to help and provide their support, they are denied to give their help, and they are even condemned. And that's a very, very tragic reality. But that's a different story, I guess. So, from the 3rd century onwards, Georgian architecture is becoming a bit, let's say, in decline. Well, I wouldn't say that something is essentially wrong with it, but it was probably affected by many factors, like fall of Constantinople, the first thing, and the other thing was that Georgia was not economically as strong as it was before, and it was divided into many parts, politically. So it was, and also it was surrounded by quite hostile enemies. So it was not easy for Georgia to exist and to survive. However, in this period, there are also kind of very pretty, very beautiful and amazing churches, like for example here in Ananuri, which is very interesting in many ways. Well, it's because of its history, it used to belong to a noble family, but it was also attacked by many invaders all the time, and it was always kind of had to be restored and re-restored again. But it survived. It survived to the present day, and it's a very, very interesting church. One of the interesting things about it is that in its relief sculptures, it has some kind of motifs which are kind of, let's say, not exactly sneaking. I wouldn't say sneaking because it's a negative word, but some motifs are coming from folklore and folk culture, like depictions of animals and plants, and very interesting kind of church. So if you come to Georgia, do visit this church, which is very near Tbilisi, quite near. The other church of this time, this later period, is Gergeti, Holy Trinity Church in Gergeti. This is not the best picture of it. The best photograph usually shows the peak, the glacious peak, Rinvari, Razbegi, behind it, and that's, I find, much more beautiful. But this is also very good photo, and it shows the location is absolutely marvelous. But the style of the church is somewhat going back to archaic shapes and archaic forms. It's kind of going heavy and less decorations, more kind of heaviness, let's say. It is quite monumental, especially when you look at it from the kind of lower part of the hill upwards. It kind of looks very, very monumental and very beautiful. But even the style of making kind of building is somewhat declining, obviously. There is nothing wrong with this later period. There are some very, very beautiful and pretty churches, really beautiful, but there are some signs, some kind of feeling that it's not getting any further. You feel like it's not going to develop anymore. So it's kind of, they are still making these big churches, big cathedrals, but it's almost like, and what's next? But there is not much next. Georgian architecture, church architecture, continues to the present day. Even in the 20th century, we have many interesting churches, like, for example, sorry, I wanted to show you Kashmiri Church, which is somewhere, it must be somewhere, hiding somewhere. Sorry, please bear with me. No, okay, I can't find it, but this latest creation, let's say, the latest big creation is this Holy Trinity Cathedral in Tbilisi, which is present see of the Catholicos Patriarch, and it's the biggest church and kind of most important today. But I would say that it does not bear as much artistry or creativity or liveliness as did the previous and older churches, and I think you would agree with me. I mean, nothing is wrong with it. It's kind of very carefully made, but that creativity which shines through in the monasteries of the Holy Cross or Svetitroveli or the other churches, very kind of not present here. So one of the other things I wanted to talk to you about is this, sorry, did I do something bad? Difference between Georgian and Armenian architecture, which I promised you that I would do when I get to this, to talking about Georgian architecture. Now, let's pick two churches. Well, it is very likely that we did have a lot of connection. Georgians and Armenians are neighbors. Of course, we were related, and I'm sure that Georgian stonemasons and Armenian stonemasons were exchanging their experiences with one another, and they were probably even moving from one country to the other. I mean, each other's countries, and even doing some kind of work there. There is, I mean, nobody can deny that, and there is a lot of similarity between Georgian and Armenian architecture. It's so much that many of my colleagues very often tell me that when I show them Georgian churches, they tell me, oh, it looks Armenian. Yeah, it kind of does, you know, but I'll tell you what are the signs that if you know them, I don't think you will ever mistake one with the other. Sorry, I've lost Sveti Cathedral somewhere, but it must be here. Just a moment. Yes, here. No, this is Sveti Cathedral. Is it okay if I put next one here? Can you see? Is it possible to see them, or should I move it this way? Is it okay? Is it okay? No, I know I probably cut some bits of Sveti, but you can still see some parts of it. Can you? Is it visible? Okay, here is Echmiadzin, the main see of Catholicos of Armenia, and here is Sveti, also the main see, ancient see of the Catholicos in Georgia. They have similar stories. Echmiadzin was built in the 4th century initially, the first church, which has not survived. Then the next one was built in the 5th century, just like Sveti was. It's kind of similar thing. And then it was rebuilt later, much later in the 15th century, I think. Yes. But I want you to focus more on the appearance and notice the difference yourselves. Now, if you look at the Armenian church, is it visible? If you look at the Armenian church, what is the first impression that you get? It is quite geometrical, very well ordered. And the colors are different. While Georgians take kind of lighter color stone, which resembles almost watercolor kind of painting, here you can see a bit kind of darker color, which can be conditioned just by local material available around. And this sense of order, this geometrism gives the sense of order, and kind of gives you a feeling of security, stability. It's down to earth, it's standing firm. It gives you promises you some kind of peace. And it's very, very down to earth. While look at the Georgian church. Georgians never follow order. Well, they do some kind of, but if you give a Georgian person, let's say 3 arches, the middle one will definitely be raised and elevated. They just can't handle same kind of geometrical shape. Well, we are kind of disobedient people, and that may explain that. We can't stand this chains and rules, but it does not suggest that Armenians have any chains and rules. It does suggest that Armenian architecture is offering a sense of stability and security, which is very, very powerful. It gives a very monumental impression. The other thing that may be different is this how they are handling this wall itself. As I told you, Georgians always put something is pulled out, something is kind of carved in. And they have to have this play of dark and light. It's kind of artistic approach to the wall itself. While Armenian church goes down to more kind of still a kind of more, let's say, almost puritanical approach. They do have decorations, of course they do, and they are very, very good quality sculptures, which are very high kind of relief sculptures. But these walls in Armenian churches are more like screen, kind of empty wall. And it kind of shows some kind of sense of stillness again and monumentality. Well, I am not saying that any of these are bad or good. And yes, one of the things I forgot is that Armenian architecture emphasizes more horizontal kind of dimension, horizontal lines, while Georgian architect has his emphasis on vertical axis. These Georgian churches are mostly, or most of them are vertically elongated. They are kind of, this vertical dimension is stronger than horizontal one. Well, I'm not saying that any of them are good or bad. I think they are just different. And as much as I dislike Georgians claiming some of the Armenian churches in Tbilisi, and I think that it's just wrong, we should not be doing that, because those churches in Tbilisi give every sign that it belongs to Armenian nation, because their identity reveals in style and not in where they are standing. Just like that, I kind of have a problem when I hear my Armenian friends claiming some of the Georgian churches. And I think we are neighbors and we should respect one another by respecting and appreciating each other's difference and uniqueness. Armenian architecture is just as powerful as I find architecture of my country, and Armenian culture has many, many fantastic and amazing pieces of work other than architecture too. Very great culture and great civilization. So I wanted to talk to you about this, the way Georgian architecture developed in the Middle Ages. Unfortunately, we don't have much in vernacular architecture of the early medieval times, because probably either they were built with less durable material and more kind of, and the better material was given to building churches, fortresses, and bridges. So, Georgian medieval architecture is still very, very kind of diverse. What I told you here, it's just very, very tiny piece of what it really is. It's absolutely vast. The material is vast, and if you want to know more about it, you absolutely have to come to Georgia and look at them yourself. So I hope you enjoyed being with us today. I want to thank this wonderful, amazing team that makes it possible to have these podcasts. And we shall meet again in about a week's time, and I promise to show you some more interesting things. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and to press like if you enjoyed it. Thank you for being with us. Bye for now.